over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
Zoos have had a lot of trouble breeding red pandas, again, because the population can be as low as 2,500 in the wild. The Knoxville Zoo is actually one of the best.
What can they teach us?
Correct. Yeah, definitely peer-reviewed research has shown that, yes, if the local communities don't buy in, it's not going to work. And then also getting the youth involved.
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
I am really trying to think of the last time I saw a red panda. I'm thinking it was New Zealand at the Auckland Zoo in December. I think that's the last one I saw.
Well, we all need more red pandas in our life. That's the short version of this podcast.
The end. The end.
Yes. But Chris, you're right. They definitely are a favorite species at a lot of accredited zoological institutions across the world. There's several in North America and in Europe. So I was lucky enough that they were at the Lincoln Park Zoo when I worked there, and I've spent hours and hours watching the red pandas at the Central Park Zoo in New York City. So yes, they're always a favorite, and they're just so stinking cute.
Oh, they are. And I know I actually saw at two zoos because since the pandemic, it's like all the poor zoos have been shut down. So haven't been able to go to some of my favorites, in LA or San Diego. But I did go to the Hamilton Zoo, had them too. So I saw them twice within the same week. So went to both zoos there. So shout out to Jesse down there in New Zealand. He's out there taking care of them.
Yes, and I want to give a big thanks and shout out to a dear friend of mine, a keeper friend, Jill Dignan, who I worked with for years at Lincoln Park Zoo. And she is kind enough to be sharing one of her amazing photos that she took of Clark, a red panda that was at the Lincoln Park Zoo for a while. And also this photo's amazing. It landed on the cover of last year's August AAZK forum, so it's American Association of Zookeepers, which is an awesome and prestigious journal for all the zookeepers out there. And so kudos to her to getting her article in there and for having her photo on the cover. And she was nice enough to share it with us. And of course, preparing for this episode, her and I were going back and forth. I was talking red pandas with her. So
I know they are a favorite. It's not only are they so dang cute, Angie. I just think when you think of red pandas, you're like, where do they fit in? Are they a panda, right? Or
a raccoon with that ring tail, or the ring striped tail. Yes. And Chris, you'll be so proud of me. I've grown throughout this podcast. That's why I love this show that we do, because I really dorked out on their evolution. I probably have like 5 slides. Slides to help answer that question, and read some newer articles have been released with their DNA data and things like that. But so that'll be a fun section for me, because usually when you do evolution, I just kind of sit back and drink my coffee. But hopefully, I'll be an active participant on that.
Good. I know I dorked out on some of this stuff too, so that's going to be a good part.
And of course, it was super easy to convince you to do red pandas. It wasn't a hard pull at all. But for me in particular, there's a special red panda named Toby that played a very critical part in my life. And so I'll have to dedicate this episode to him. When I was a young keeper at the zoo, I, of course, worked with anything with hoofs, horns, and antlers, AKA not red pandas.
Right.
But John, my husband, he worked with the red pandas and lions and tigers and all sorts of big creatures. And we had just started dating. And he brought me over to the red panda area, where he introduced me behind the scenes, very close and personal, of course, through protective contact. But he introduced me to Mr. Toby. And Mr. Toby was the cutest red panda you had ever seen. And John let me feed him red grapes, which was just darling. And Chris, I have to tell you, it's in that moment that I instantly fell in love with Toby.
Yeah. Not John.
No.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, John better not listen to this podcast.
Well, no, he knows. He had to work very hard for it. So it was, I mean, I will tell you, letting your girlfriend feed a red panda grapes up close and personal scored him some serious points. Let's be real.
Yeah,
but no, it was Toby that I fell in love with, and just wanted to learn more about the species and what was going on with their conservation story. And so that's where my love started for them. And I'm glad that I get to share that with everybody on the podcast today. And then, yes, of course, John and I, we had a nice little story after that as well. But I was talking with John last night, reminiscing about Toby and when we were kids dating back in the zoo. And he reminded me that they loved Toby so much, but he had the cutest face and he was very proper. Mm-hmm. So they thought that he looked like a little English guy. And so whenever him and Jill and some of the other keepers would talk about Toby, they thought he had an English accent. So they would, his voice, whenever they would talk about him, they would do these English accents. So anyways, it's just that
and they're nowhere near England.
No,
nowhere near England.
Well, some fossils have been found there, and we'll talk about that.
Okay, yeah.
But yes, no, they're nowhere. No, but he just looks so prim and proper. He was just a cute little English guy, and it also just goes to show how much zookeepers, they work with their animals on a daily basis, like how they really know their personalities and they relate to them, and then they have fun with them. And yes, it's but red pandas are easy to fall in love with. Yeah.
No, they got an amazing story. I didn't realize how endangered they were. Mm-hmm. They're endangered. They're classified as endangered. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, well, in just the past 20 years. And so these stories I'm telling are from like 10 years ago. So in the past 20 years, their populations declined by about 50%. And they're endangered. The counts are hard to do. We'll talk about that because they're kind of a nocturnal species and they live in elevated forests and things like that. But I think the guesstimate is less than 10,000 animals, and that's on the high end. I mean, because I think the ICUN did their last count in like 2015.
Yeah, the low end was like 2,500.
Yeah,
it's nothing. That's nothing. Yeah, so they're really endangered, and just interesting story. And then just some final shout outs. I have to give shout outs to how we had some new Patreon subscribers this week. We caught fire with the Jessica and Steven. Thank you. Bryce, Sabrina, and Elizabeth. So we had that's 5 people join us this week on
That's
Patreon.
Amazing. Awesome.
I know, it was a big week. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we'll be releasing some new content just for you guys here real soon.
Yeah, we just talked about that, how we're going to kind of adjust with our Patreon. You're supporting free education. We just gave money to Global Conservation Force, and our new poll is going to be coming out here in the next week or so for who we give money out for this next round. And, it's just, it helps us keep going and spreading this message. So thank you. And then really quick, I want to dedicate this episode to Josh, who sent us an email this week. And again, it's just so wonderful that people around the world that are hearing us and listening to us, changing what they're doing. We had Azuki, I think was her name. Forgive me for getting it wrong, but we did Raccoon Dog. Mm-hmm. She's studying in Japan and is going to work in animal conservation. So she told us to do Raccoon Dog. Josh has switched his major now, and he's going to now major in digital cinema and minor in zoology. So He wants to make zoology. I know he wants to make documentaries promoting wildlife conservation. So Josh, thank you for the email, and we got your list. We did do pangolins, but one of those on your list we're going to do really soon. I promise you.
Yes, the fossa for sure.
Oh well, she just gave it up. But yeah,
I can't wait. It's an amazing suggestion.
So
yeah. And once again, too, if you can't donate to Patreon, I understand, especially in these times, there's a lot of hardships. So yeah, just give us a 5-star ratings on iTunes. And then if you have a few extra minutes, if you can write a little bit of words of praise, that would be awesome. And so I want to say thank you to Sabrina Camp, wrote us a wonderful review on iTunes.
She's her 200th? shoot at
We
200.
we're at 201 now. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sabrina, thank you.
And then L rank 123 also gave us some beautiful words, and those really inspire Chris and I to keep going. I know when it's late at night and I'm tired, and I just remember all those kind things you say, and so I keep diving deeper into the literature for you all. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Mike did say he gave us a 5-star review like months ago. He's like, "Where's the trust, man?" I was like, "Okay." My buddy Mike from LA Zoo. He just always wants me to say his name every week. Love him. I cannot wait till the zoos open back up. Oh my goodness. Got to go see my animals. All right, so let's describe these red pandas. Because
darling, cute.
Oh yeah. I mean,
case closed.
Large round heads. I mean, size of a cat. I mean, I've got the sizes, but so you're talking, puffy house cat size, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're weighing. Okay, I'll do the sizes. You do the coloring. They can weigh up to 13 pounds or 6.5 kilograms. 24, so that's 2 feet in length or 60 centimeters. And then their tail is pretty long, an 18-inch tail or 47 centimeters.
Yes.
So they're long and just poofy.
Yeah, and before I describe their face, just in general, they have long, soft, reddish brown, maybe orange tints, fur on the upper parts of the body, and then a lot of them have blackish fur on the lower parts, on their legs. And then their faces are just very distinctive with white markings, tear markings, similar to those of a raccoon. But Chris, their face is where it's at. That's where the extra amazing cuteness happens. And that's because they have white high points or markings on their face, similar to that of a raccoon. They're going to have white eyebrow-like teardrops above their eyes. They have a white muzzle, a little white cheek, like if you're going to put blush on, if you're a woman, they have a little white right there. And then their ears are often rimmed in white outer fur. And these markings can be distinct for each animal. And of course, depending on where they live and what subspecies they are, they might be a little bit lighter, a little bit darker in color, but they're just darling. And then their tail is the poof tail that you've all dreamed about. And it is ringed, somewhat like a raccoon, but the rings are more subtle, from like a dark orange to a little bit lighter orange. And once again, that's going to vary depending on the animal itself. But yeah, it has the face similar to a raccoon with the black nose and the whiskers, and just if you're not familiar with what they look like, go to our show notes. They are just, and then I spent a fair amount of time not really researching, just watching videos of them walking around their enclosures or up in trees, or just being darling sleeping. We're going to learn in the behavior section that they sleep a lot, like giant pandas. So there's darling pictures of them just sleeping in trees, and they're
amazing. I mean, it's like that's why they've been called the Himalayan raccoon, or a cat bear, or a lesser panda, or a bear cat, or a fox bear, or Firefox. Yes.
Funny you mentioned that. This is just, I promise I'll stop telling John stories, but he really is such a character. I can't control myself. Yeah. So I was reading and I learned, like the hint that you just gave, the internet browser, Firefox, has been said to be named after the red panda, because that's a nickname.
I thought it was a fox.
I thought it was a fox too. So I say to John, "Hey, honey," this is like, of course, last night, like midnight. "Hey, did you know this? Did you know that Firefox was a red panda?" And he says, "Oh yeah, of course." And I'm like, "Yeah, right. Like, how? Why? That's so random. Why would you know that?" And he's so funny. He looks at me and like he has this deadpan face. He's like, "Come on, I'm a zoo guy and an IT guy. I know these things." Because interestingly enough, for people listening, John's career before he became an animal keeper was in IT. So he fixed computers way back in the day and didn't necessarily love it. And then he got a call from a professor he made a connection with back in his college, a biology professor said, "Hey, I need this intern to do a hippo thing at
That's right. That's right. He
at
told the
Busch
story, yeah.
Gardens. It
Yeah,
doesn't pay very much." And he was making
Yeah.
decent money in IT, and he went for it. He took that risk. And so, long story short, 20 years later, he
Just running the zoo.
well, and he knows that a Firefox was a red panda.
I didn't know that. I know it was a red panda. There you go.
It's like, geez.
There you go.
But what I found was super cool is that the company Mozilla, I don't know if that's how you say it, but they actually put their money where their mouth was, and they adopted 2 baby red pandas at the Knoxville Zoo in Tennessee. And the Knoxville Zoo is highlighted as one of the AZA institutions in North America that has a really incredible breeding program and have produced
it's like
a lot
one of the best
cubs
in the world. I think. I think it's one of the best in the world. Yeah,
So.
Yeah, they're amazing, and it's interesting because zoos have had a lot of trouble breeding red pandas. Again, because the population can be as low as 2,500 in the wild. The Knoxville Zoo is actually one of the best in the world, and I've known that for years for breeding red pandas. And that's probably just based on, where they are. They thought it was a temperature thing, because looking at where red pandas range from, they go from northern Myanmar into China. So you're into West Sichuan or Yunnan provinces. And then they go across Nepal, India, and Tibet. So really the temperate forests of the Himalayas, where they range anywhere from 7,000 to 15,000 feet, or 2,000 to almost 5,000 meters in altitude. So they're in that high altitude range. So again, like Angie's saying, it's hard to do studies on them because they are in some of these harder to reach areas.
And they're in trees and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. They're in these deciduous or conifer forests. And, we're going to talk about their diet, but just looking for bamboo, like their not really related cousin, the giant panda.
You already gave it a spoiler alert. Come on.
Well, they're related. We're related to pandas.
That's right.
We all are. We're all related.
We go back far enough. That's right.
Yeah. So they are related to pandas. It's just you'll be surprised where. But besides being adorable, Angie, why? I mean, red pandas are just amazing. But why else? Why care? Like, why care about this certain species, this incredibly unique species?
Well, Chris, they're definitely a symbol of healthy ecosystems. So if you find red pandas, you're going to find healthy forests and really in-depth ecosystems that are all functioning properly. And wherever those are, you're going to find people that have sustainable livelihoods. So it's a really good example of what can work in certain places. And their diet isn't strictly bamboo like giant pandas. They do eat some berries and things like that. Obviously, red grapes, like I fed Toby. No, they're not eating those in the wild. But they do like they have a little sweet tooth, and so they can also disperse seeds. But yeah, they're just a really important symbol of needing healthy forest, period. And when we get to conservation, we'll talk about several areas in China and Nepal and India where they are protected and have protected ranges and things like that. And yeah, Chris, so most of the regions where they live, they are definitely loved and adored. And there's even an important economic tourism impact that they're making in several areas where you can go see them and things like that. So they're definitely a species that are on people's radar, but not out of the woods yet, or not out of trouble yet, just because they do need healthy forests. And it harkens back to my interview with Sunarto about Sumatran tigers, where he said, "Save a tiger, save yourself." And I think the red pandas may be similar to that because they're just such a symbol, besides cuteness, of course, of a healthy forest that they live in, healthy and abundant. No,
absolutely. And I mean, it's just, I'll jump ahead to evolution. We'll get back to it, but They're the only species in their taxonomic family.
Yeah.
So
they're a
they
living
say it's
fossil. That's why I started
living relic.
like
Yeah.
I mean I hate to be a person that needs like big powerful statements, to be attracted to. But for me, for evolution, because it's not my main area of study and interest. But when I read that, I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I need to know more.
Yeah.
I need to know more.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're one of these edge groups where they don't have, like, they're the last of their family group, right?
They're kind. Yeah, they're kind. Yeah, basically. Yeah, and then I have a quote. It was Dr. Angela Glatson, and she's manages the Red Panda Global Species Management Plan and president of Red Panda. She said, quote, "Losing red pandas to extinction would be like losing the whole cat family, from lions to domestic cats. All of them gone. Tigers, everything. Leopards, boom. That's like what's left. That's Red Panda. They're that unique, that they're... So put in that perspective, you're like, oh gosh, yeah, we gotta fight.
Yeah. I just got goosebumps, but not really in the good way. Kind of in the
Yeah. It's interesting when you put it in that perspective, how how they're the last.
Super unique.
Now, in that sense, Angie, I've been talking a lot about biodiversity, habitat destruction. Well, I'm going to give you some conservation optimism this week.
Yay!
Some
we
good
need that.
news. Yes, I
we
know.
need that in our lives,
especially now.
Right now, all day long, up and down the river.
Yes. And so I was really curious because I remember I brought this up ages ago when we did something near Nepal, and I talked about how Nepal was like very successful with snow leopards, locals buying into preserving snow leopards for ecotourism and these other things. So I was like, okay, what exactly is going on in Nepal? And I'll tell you, they have become a model for countries around the world. I believe, things that they have implemented should be implemented worldwide.
In Bhutan,
many
right?
countries. Yeah. So, but I looked at specifically Nepal and their government, and this all started in the early 70s, way back before we were born. When our parents were born. No, so it started way back in the 70s. And it started with this concept because I kept looking at Nepal conservation, and it kept popping up on this community forestry. And so I'm going to cover that in a minute. It's a very interesting concept. But their government came together and said, okay, we're going to focus on conservation. We have some very unique biomes. We have very unique animals. So we need to help preserve them. So their first focus was their national parks, where they were working on conserving tigers and rhinos. Now, that has hugely expanded since then, but that was the beginning. They have collaborated with international NGOs, local communities to help curb poaching and illegal wildlife trade. It's become one of the world's best examples of how a country can do wildlife conservation. So where it all started, this, and I just really quickly just want to cover it. It's community forestry. I just thought it was so interesting because the government saw their forests and their Himalayan slopes were degrading quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the people weren't, taking care. Well, it was government owned it all, right? So the people really didn't take any ownership of it. And so they were just exploiting, cutting down trees, getting all the things they needed. And the government was supposed to take care of the forests. And I guess it was overwhelming. They couldn't do it. And so there's just all these slopes were degrading. So what they did is the government decentralized and put local communities directly in control of their forests and the habitat surrounding that. And basically, the people have formed these communities, these forest communities, where they have now managed the forest. They go in and get wood for fuel or timber or fodder, getting plants and stuff for their livestock. And it has actually helped the communities grow and economically grow. And the forests have been regenerating and the land has been regenerating itself because the people, I think they're finding there's so many, different studies looking at this, but the people are invested in it and invested in the health of the ecosystem. And so it's working. So biodiversity is returning. And it's just a great example of local communities taking ownership of their wildlife and their ecosystems around there. So that has been a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's cool. I mean, it was cool. You think about it, because especially for the red panda, that is their primary, in Nepal, their primary habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to preserve that. Other things Nepal's been doing, you will like this. Community-based anti-poaching units. So they have that around the country, especially like snow leopards was a big one. And they're using youth, voluntary associations of youth that are helping a man or woman like be participants in this anti-poaching units. So what they're saying is they have over 400 of these units around Nepal, mostly young folks, women and men and women. And they said when you get the youth involved, so this made me think of the All Creatures Kids podcast, getting the youth involved.
Of course, I love it.
Yeah, they're more motivated.
Send me your kids, folks. I want to interview them about animals.
Yes, send me your kids. But when you make the young generation aware, it motivates them and just pivotal in conservation. So just to kind of quote this article I was reading, it just said, Nepal has a beautiful message for the world. Do not let the local community be isolated from conservation strategies, but instead let them enjoy the benefits of conservation following the principles of sustainability. So you engage these local communities, make them stakeholders, and help them develop agendas and conservation schemes, and you're going to see results like what's going on in Nepal. And so now that means the existence of over near 650 one-horned rhinos, almost 200 Bengal tigers, hundreds or a couple thousand Asiatic elephants, gaur, red pandas. All of these animals are benefiting from the efforts in Nepal. And I just thought there's more to dig in there. I mean, that's a whole hour-long conversation.
Sure. Yeah. We should try to get somebody from there to talk to us about it, because...
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and just for me, it's obviously very simple. But looking at some of the national parks in the areas where these red pandas live, when I was doing research for this pod, it was so beautiful. I was like, that's where I need to be right now. Like, that's where I want to live. And I have not been to Nepal, but my dear friend Cassie actually did a study abroad there many years ago, where she lived with a family and studied and learned a lot about Nepal and their culture, and just she loved it. So it's on my bucket list, and definitely reviewing some of these parks I just felt really connected. And after hearing everything you just told me, I'm like, oh, it's like full circle. It makes sense. They really are.
And we've talked about this, getting, you and I, even many of our interviews, talking to some of the experts, we've talked about conservation so complex.
So complex.
But
yeah,
getting the locals buy-in is critical. Like, it won't work. Right?
Correct. Yeah, definitely peer-reviewed research has shown that, yes, if the local communities don't buy in, it's not going to work. And then also getting the youth involved. Because a really cool study once showed that, like, youth in an area that has maybe red pandas, or I believe the study was actually out of Kenya, where local communities, the children, they would ask them, what's a endangered species, or what's a rare species? And a lot of the kids were putting different either antelopes or lions. That's what they were checking off the boxes. And nobody was putting the Grevy's zebra, which is really endangered, only found pretty much in Kenya and maybe little parts of Ethiopia. And there's 1,000 to 2,000, maybe 3,000 left. And so that was their unique endangered animals, but the kids didn't see it as endangered or unique because they actually see them all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where the NGOs started explaining to them, like, no, actually, in our country, the lion is doing well and the antelope are doing really well. It's the zebra in our community, this special, unique species of zebra, the Grevy's zebra, that's really really endangered. And so once they explain that to the kids, that like, you're very blessed, like you're the only kids in the world that get to see these
You get to
zebras.
see this. Yeah. Yeah.
They were able to take ownership and then understand a little bit more how special they were. And then of course, Lewa and some of those areas in Kenya have done pretty well. And then so areas like Lewa have done a good job of integrating the community, and then they're working really hard to help save the grubby zebra, which is another pod for another day. I promise.
Yeah.
I promise.
Oh,
folks.
yeah. That's the last pod we ever do.
I know it probably won't be. I'm actually itching, chomping at the bit. However, I will say, studying red pandas this week kind of made zebras fall to the wayside as far as my love goes.
Okay. Well, they're just such a unique animal. I mean, jump into evolution. I'm excited to hear what you found, because I went down a rabbit hole too. This was the original panda. You know that. When they just had an animal named Panda, this was it.
Yes.
For 50 years, right? And then we got the giant panda or panda bears. But very similar, which is going to be cool. That's the rabbit hole I went down, because red pandas are a true carnivore, like giant pandas, but they eat bamboo.
Yes.
Like, what the heck? Like, what? I didn't. What?
Yes. Yes.
Where did these things come from?
And one of the reasons, besides the families that they're closest related to, being the giant panda and raccoons, they fall somewhere in the middle, is that they really do have a true carnivore digestive system, which consists basically of a simple stomach and a short intestines. And having this short digestive tract is basically good for normal carnivores like cats and bears and things like that, because they readily absorb the nutrients they need from meat and poop it out. But when you're eating bamboo and other plant material, it needs to stay in your digestive system longer, theoretically, like a horse. A horse and a cow have very different, but a lot more going on as far as length in their intestinal tract to do all the things that they need to do to get the nutrients that they need from plant material. So yeah, that makes them goofy for sure. It definitely, they're basically described as like a carnivore that's an herbivore, which is bizarre.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's just crazy. Like when we covered pandas, I was like, are you kidding me?
And giant pandas are the same way. And so that's that's so interesting about their evolution is
they're not, well, okay. So red pandas were first described as members of Procyninidae, which is a raccoon family. This is back in the 1800s, but it was controversial. But, morphological similarities. That's how they were classifying animals back in the day. Teeth, the ring tail, the head, all very similar. Like, okay, that's why they called it the Himalayan raccoon. But then they did some early DNA studies, and said, no, maybe they're more related to bears, Ursidae. And then some more DNA research has said, no, these things are in their own. So they're their own family, the Ailuridae, Ailuridae. And recent molecular phylogenetic studies.
Well, in 2020.
Shows that red pandas are very ancient species in carnivores. The superfamily Mustelidae, which is the mustelids, our favorites. Well, mustelids are part of it, but weasels, raccoons, and skunks. So it's like almost full circle, right? They actually kind of are more related to raccoons, even though they're not in that family. They're in the superfamily, right? The big overreaching family way back in the tree, which I'm going to get to. So the superfamily Mustelidae has our favorite, still my favorite. I just, mustelids are just, I go back to honey badger. I'm sorry, just my favorite.
Honey badger don't care.
No, but even weasels and the black-footed ferrets, tap, tap, tap. I'll never, ever, ever forget that episode. Just taps.
Yeah, black-footed ferrets.
Dog.
Your BFF is a fun one.
Oh, that's a fun one. Okay. Procyninidae, which is our raccoons, coatis, which we have to do coatis at some point. Others, And then Mephididae, what is a stink badger? Skunks and stink badgers.
That's why we do this podcast, Chris.
All right, somebody out there knows what a stink badger is. We will find out, because now I'm really curious of what a stink badger is. So red pandas are part of that super family, but really they're their own family, very unique species. They diverged, Angie. I don't know, did you get the years, how far ago they diverged from panda bears? It was...
Like 5 million years ago?
No, 43 million years ago.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So 43 million years ago, red pandas and panda bears diverged. Then red pandas diverged from weasels around 40 million years ago. So I got a fun question real quick, Angie, before I go down the rabbit hole I went down. Okay, so Ursidae and the superfamily of mustelids, Musteluridae. Okay. There's a family of animals that are in between that the red panda is more closely related. I'm going to see if you could remember that. I'm looking at a bootstrap tree they did with genetics, and it's a species that's related to Ursidae that pops up every now and then, and we're like, oh my goodness, I keep forgetting that fact.
Well, Chris, I know it's not the zebra, so we know that. We know that. No. And I did come across it. I did so much reading last night. Oh, geez.
It's not a land animal. How about that?
Oh, okay. Then that's a different route.
Yeah.
Well,
Ursidae, these things are kind of related to
like
Ursidae.
dolphins.
Go back to Miasis. Not dolphins.
Whales.
No, not whales. There's another mammal that's in the ocean.
Seals.
Yes.
Seals.
Yeah, pinnipeds.
Oh, goodness gracious. I got to drink some more coffee. It's early in the morning here.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if I came across that piece of data. I was thinking of something else. Sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah. So bears, Ursidae, pinnipeds are kind of close. Yeah, I know. We always forget it.
Yeah.
And then it comes back up to haunt us. We're like, oh my gosh, I always forget that fact. You know, it's like hippos. What are hippos mostly closely related to?
Yeah, that was a sea creature. That was the
dolphins
whales, or whales. Yeah,
in whales. Yeah.
Cetaceans.
So, cetaceans. Okay, Angie. So where I went down. Oh my goodness. And I'll make this quick because I don't want to bore people. Because I remember, one of our first episodes, I was talking about DNA. But I went through
mitochondrial DNA, not just any DNA, mind you.
It's mitochondrial DNA is awesome. Okay. How are red pandas and giant pandas so similar, but so far apart on the evolutionary tree? And it was something.
Well, the researchers, I mean, I think they originally, of course, I thought they were related, but yes, it definitely has a lot to do with convergent evolution. That they both went down these bizarre routes of being carnivores that eat bamboo, which we'll talk a lot in nutrition about how bamboo is not the greatest thing to eat because, there's not a lot of energy that you can gather from it, and you have to eat a lot of it, and you don't get a lot of energy, so you're tired all the time to begin with. So yeah, they went down these very similar routes, completely separate.
Mm-hmm. It's all environmental. Yeah.
Well, and of course I dorked out about the nutrition because just every time I read about giant pandas or red pandas and their digestive system, it's just different podcast for a different day. And probably for a very small select group of people. Yeah. But no, where I went this time, and I don't think we talked too much about it in giant pandas, but is their extra opposable thumb-like grip thing. That's so not science. The grip thing, please don't quote me on that.
Well, pseudo thumbs.
Thank you. That's why you're a good podcast partner.
How in the heck do they both have it?
Correct. Yes. And so it doesn't make any sense. No, they both separately, convergently. Mm-hmm. But that's the paper I was reading late last night out of Nature. And it was called How the Panda's Thumb Evolved Twice. And it's by Jane Koo, and I think it's from 2017. And Yeah, it's just really, really interesting because there's such distinct species and they both have this thumb. And really quickly, letting my anatomy self dork out for a second, this thumb is basically, they basically have the 5 digits like I guess we have, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have an enormously enlarged wrist bone, so a carpal bone that is remarkably dexterous and allows them to grip and handle the bamboo. And it's considered, like an extra digit, if you will, or a false thumb, like you mentioned, a pseudo thumb. So pretty cool stuff. But the researchers did some DNA analysis and found, I won't mention the genes, but looked into genes that are important for thumb and limb development and found similar mutations on these limb development genes for both the giant panda and the red panda. But what's really cool, Chris, is it was kind of always thought that this false thumb was to help them grip the bamboo, to hold on to it so they can strip it. And we'll talk about that nutrition, what parts of the bamboo are more nutritious. But what researchers now think is that obviously convergent evolution happened. They both got this thumb, but they think that the red panda false thumb was actually maybe more for climbing and then became a benefit of gripping the bamboo. Where they believe for the giant panda, the thumb was evolved straight up for gripping bamboo.
Bamboo. And
of course, we'll never probably fully know. But the
fact that they both
the similar mutations and similar limb development genes, different times, different species. Science is so cool. Evolution is so cool.
It keeps going. It keeps going because the article I read that I talked
Oh my God, we're such dorks. I'm sorry to our listeners.
No, they love this stuff.
I
love it. You gotta love science. Love science. This is how we learn and how actually it does affect conservation because we understand them better. Then we can understand what strategies to implement. So, excuse us while we have our little dorky science moments. But this was out of the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, which is a top journal.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right under Nature.
Yeah.
So it might have been, I don't know if it's the same group, but this is Comparative Genomics reveals convergent evolution between the bamboo-eating giant and red pandas.
Oh, is that the 2016 paper, I think?
17 is what I have.
Okay,
it's
17,
Who, H.U. et al., or others that wrote it. And talked a little bit about the thumbs, but what I also found interesting, not only this carries beyond just the thumbs, it's their diets and their digestive systems. So bamboo, is obviously their source of amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, everything they need. And like you said, there's not a ton in there. So how do you get two carnivores that give up eating meat, give up chasing down animals,
that have a digestive tract made to eat meat, smaller,
and they end up eating bamboo as their main diet? And how do their bodies utilize those nutrients? Because if we started eating bamboo every day, we would die. I think we would end up dying pretty quick. There's nothing in there for us, not much. So they actually both had to evolve 3 genes. Here you go. So Angie's like, I'm not going to read the genes. I'll just give you one. PRSS1 is a gene. That's why we don't read them, because they're boring.
They are very boring.
PRSS36 and CP.
I remember having to memorize like all these genes for reproductive evolutionary biology stuff. And I forget. I think I would make up little acronyms and stuff. And once in a while, you'd get like a really good one. And sometimes they are short for like what the amino acid or the protein's name is. And then sometimes you get cool ones like hedgehog. That one I remember.
I know. That one you remember. That's a good one. But yeah, those 3 genes in both species evolved and they differed, so from other carnivores, so they can actually digest the dietary protein or the amino acids they get. And then there's other genes in there. I didn't go down the whole thing because, oh my goodness, people would show.
Well, and I would admit,
turn off the
I
podcast.
glossed over a paper because it was getting late last night, but
Yeah,
about
it's very
there's special
similar.
microbial communities that help digest the cellulose.
Right.
Because I don't
But-
believe they don't have enzymes to digest the cellulose. No, it's the
No, I don't think so.
yeah, it's the
I'm just saying, the overall reaching picture, the mosaic we're trying to paint is giant pandas and red pandas, even though they're very similar, so similar you would think they're relatives, and they're not. And they actually evolved that way separately. And they share very similar genes, not only that ended up in these pseudothumbs, but also to be able to digest and eat bamboo. So just wow.
Yes.
I was just wowed.
Well, and then I didn't find any papers on it, but a little spoiler alert for the reproduction is, from what we know with red pandas, is that we think that they come into estrus like for similar to giant pandas, like one day for once a year, some real goofy, not best reproductive strategy. But
I don't think we've had a species this like closely related that, or not closely related that. Oh my goodness, I don't even know what to make of this. It's like you have two species that should be related. They're so much alike, but they're nowhere near being related.
Sure, that's evolution. That's what they needed to do to survive in their environment. And once again, I guess for my fun weekend readings, maybe I'll try to find some reproductive papers, but I wonder if this bizarre reproductive strategy of only coming into estrus, one day, once a year type deal that is well known and well documented in giant pandas because they've been studied so much, and they're able to do artificial insemination on them and things like that. Right. I wonder if it has something to do with the climate or the seasonal nutrition of the bamboo or lack thereof. I mean, my goodness, if you don't have much, I mean, it's well known, this from all your research in horses with nutrition and reproduction and livestock in general, that if they're not having a good energy content, they're not going to have a lower reproductive output, right? They're not going to be able to get pregnant, things like that. So maybe I'm just totally, this is why this podcast is fun, but it seems to be from the reproductive strategy that's somewhat similar, as well as, they don't come into estrus as often, but it's still being studied because they haven't had quite as much attention as the giant panda, of course, as far as figuring out their reproductive system. So yes, funky business. I love it. It's amazing.
Oh, it's nuts. That was fun. It was fun to like read that stuff. I mean, people are like, are you kidding me? But yeah, it's fun for us. It's fun. So, all right, just to wrap up evolution. I mean, there's two subspecies. Again, this was been debated for a long time, but a recent paper in February of this year came out, another genetic study that showed that there actually is two subspecies. There is the Chinese red panda with his Estrus Cycle. And then there's the Himalayan red panda, which is Estrus fulgens. And so they believe there are two separate subspecies.
Yeah. And then just like, science. And this probably frustrates some people. And I think it probably doesn't help with the people that are somewhat anti-science or things like that. But it is always evolving and it is changing. I mean, with coronavirus, we're learning new things as we get more data and more numbers and things like that. And I think it's an interesting process for people that to see it in real time with coronavirus, how we're learning as we go. And it's so frustrating. I know when you're told one thing and then it might change, but that's what scientists do, right? We challenge each other's hypothesis, and we always want to get more data and more numbers and use evidence-based reasons to make practical suggestions on how to stay healthy or things like that. But Chris, to your point about two subspecies of red pandas, a recent study in 2020 about red pandas and their DNA samples in China, in the Himalayas, that were separated by a river suggests that these two subspecies should actually be treated as distinct species.
Okay.
So it ebbs and It ebbs and it flows as the more information we get out there. And it's believed that this Brahmaputra River is a natural barrier between the Himalayan red panda and the Styanese or the Stein's red panda. So subspecies, distinct species, they all need to be saved regardless, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Last question. What is the largest animal of the Himalayas?
Currently?
Yeah, currently.
Well, I want to say,
yeah.
Do tigers go that far north?
Yeah.
Okay. It's bigger than a tiger?
Yeah. It's the largest animal of the Himalayas.
I don't know. Well, I need more hints.
It's not the Yeti or whatever. This is like the abominable snowman. It's like, yeah, okay. Not that.
Okay.
That's not real. All right. It's one of your favorite classifications.
Let's do charades. I can see your face. Let's do charades. A moose. An elk.
No. Moose? Moose? What's a moose doing in the Himalayas?
I'm sorry. You're not the best charades partner, my friend.
No. In the Himalayas.
I know. Well, I was getting caught in the moment.
There you go.
An elk or a deer.
Moo.
Oh, a cow. Cattle.
What kind of cow? What kind of cow? It's a special cow from the Himalayas.
Oh.
It's a 3-letter word. Starts with.
Yak.
Sounds like. Yes.
Awesome.
A yak.
Chris.
Himalayan.
FYI, I'm picking Pip or John for my
charades
partner.
Like
yes. No.
Moose.
That was the biggest moose antlers on your head possible.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm looking at this huge picture, like 6 feet at the shoulder. They weigh like 2,000 pounds. The wild yak, and it's related to the domestic yak. I just saw it. I was like, oh my goodness, Angie will love this.
Well, I'm dying to do yaks or musk ox, but you're making me wait until you think it's more of a winter species.
Well, musk ox is winter. We could do yak in here soon because they're pretty cool. I mean, they're huge. There's the Himalayan wild yak. It's a monster. Huge animal, about 10,000 mature adults. So they're vulnerable, but they are up there. Now, just a couple things on red pandas. They can live as long as 23 years. Average I read was about 8 years in the wild.
Yeah, 8 years, 14's high. And then I thought the longevity record was 21 years at the Rotterdam Zoo. But
okay, maybe.
It might be updated,
One size, yeah. Now, this is a horrific sight. The predator. So you have 2 of the world's cutest animals. One of them's eating one.
I know.
So the red panda is getting eaten by my other favorite from the Himalayas. The
snow leopard, yeah.
Yeah. Snowies, go catch a hoof and horns thing. Go catch some of Angie's favorites. Yeah, so that's their major predators. We talked about, I know you want to dork out a little bit more on bamboo. We kind of covered it, just low nutrition, high fiber.
Yeah.
Not a ton in there.
Well, so they're similar to the giant panda. They can't digest cellulose, so they have to consume a lot of bamboo. But they're also smart about it. They eat parts of the bamboo that are more nutritious and are more easily digested, like the shoots and then the leafy components. And so depending on what season it is, sometimes they have more nutrients and more energy. And then other parts of the season, they're going to obviously not get much nutrition. And because of this, they'll spend on average 13 hours a day eating and looking for food. And in the winter, when things are less nutritious, they can lose up to 15% of their body weight. Yeah. And I think that it's also important to note what is unique from red pandas and giant pandas. Obviously, tons of stuff is unique, but red pandas will also consume berries and blossoms, bird eggs, and small leaves on other plants. But researchers do think that the large majority of their diet is or should be bamboo. Yeah.
Now, I did read, we transitioned into behavior, but they, in very cold temperatures, I mean, these, they like I think 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit is what I read. That's kind of the temperatures they prefer. But when it does get cold, they don't really hibernate, but they do go dormant, right? And then they'll come out and eat when they need to. But, they're mainly what is that word? The night and dusk?
Yeah, crepuscular. John says I always
There
say
you
it
go.
wrong, but nocturnal. They basically are going to be active normally during the nighttime and at dusk and dawn, which is why it's another hard animal for researchers that are trying to do population counts to find. Because not only are they active when a lot of things are sleeping and it's dark out, but they're also solitary. They usually don't come together unless it's a breeding season time, and they're up in trees. Red pandas are excellent climbers, and they spend a large majority of their life arboreal, or eating and sleeping and nesting in these evergreen or coniferous forests. And so they're up there, and they're really skillful climbers, acrobatic climbers. They love being in the trees, and they're really cool when they actually descend down a tree or down a limb. They're really good at it. They go head first, and they're very, very flexible. And that's why one of the reasons this opposable extra false thumb helps them grip onto the branches as they're climbing around. And so in trees, they're pretty good at climbing. But when they are on the ground, they move a little bit slower, and they kind of have this, slow gait, or wobbly kind of gait, if you will, when they're walking. But, they can trot and they can move out if they want to a little bit. But because of their diet and not having a lot of energy from the bamboo or things that they eat, they are one of my spirit animals in that they like to lay around and sleep a lot.
Sleep all day. Yes.
Not a bad gig. And they will sleep in the trees. And so there's adorable pictures on the internet or on YouTube of them sleeping, and they're pretty cute. When it's hot, they sleep like super stretched out, like just like laying over a branch or two and rest. But when it's cold, it might be even more charming because of that fluffy ringed tail that we mentioned earlier on the podcast. The tail acts in two ways. First, it helps balance them as they're moving around the trees, and also feeding with the bamboo. It'll help them balance while they're eating. But even more charming, Chris, is researchers think that the tail acts to help insulate them and protect them in the cold weather, because they'll curl up into a ball and nestle into their tail, and the tail kind of fluffs around them. And so it helps keep them warm in the colder months, or when it's snowing and things like that. So their tail, besides being cute, actually has a lot of physiological function to help them balance and keep them warm. And I don't know if we mentioned it early in the podcast, but their tail is like 18 inches, a foot and a half in length.
Yeah.
So it's big and it's fluffy, which helps make them super cute, but they use it and it keeps them warm. And one of the last behaviors that I stumbled upon that I just have to share with everyone, because it's very, very endearing, is usually they're hanging out, resting in the trees, but they're often observed cleaning themselves, so licking their body, their arms, and they wash their face with their paws. So that's probably similar to something you might see in a raccoon. And they love to stretch out and rub their back and their tummy against rocks and trees, and just a little self-massage never hurt anybody. So you got to love their cute behavior. And once again, they are mostly solitary, and so they'll let the other red pandas know where they live by marking their territory with urine and a very subtle musk secretions from their anal glands, which once again, when they're rubbing too, sometimes that'll help, they'll put their perfume out there for the world. And when they do come across each other and it's not breeding season, they're not going to really fight or do too much. They let each other know that, hey, let's not hang out right now. And where they'll do like an arching their tail and their back, and they'll bob their head a little bit and emit a puffing or huffing sound. And sometimes they'll jaw clap as well. So they basically do a stance that's I guess tells the other panda that this is their territory, but to me, it's still pretty cute.
It's like, okay, you're scary. Quote,
I'm
unquote.
just like, you're actually more cute now. No. And they do some vocalizations. I do like a chirping Twitter sound. I asked John about it. He said that Toby, with his English accent, he never really heard him twittering much, but he did hear him like making the huffing and puffing sounds. So
Okay.
I guess Toby didn't have really a reason to chitter or twitter, or he did it at nighttime when he was busy, when only the zoo night keepers are around, right? Like, so, which was
That's
not
true.
John.
That's true.
So that's the thing, is a lot of these behaviors we miss because they're nocturnal or a crepuscular species.
And just, you're saying Twitter, and I'm like, oh gosh, Twitter, the whole thing. I just don't want to go down politics, but Twitter's an actual word that means give a call consisting of repeated light, tremulous sounds.
Yeah.
So,
I have a clip of it here. Do you want to listen?
Okay. Yeah. A nice Twitter. That is definitely a repeated light, tremulous sound. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So,
well, that would sound like calling for a mate, right? Is that,
you got it. And that exactly. And that's where I'll text Jill when we get done with this podcast and ask her if she's heard the twittering. Because yes, that's a noise they're going to make when they are courting one another, when male and female do come together, I think once a year. When male and female become less shy, they'll come out to one another, and their scent marking will increase so they can attract one another. And the twittering will be made by both males and females. And once a female decides that she likes a male, courtship will usually take several hours, but overall, the interaction between the male and female is pretty short. It's usually less than 24 hours. And basically, males will compete for access to females. And so she can pick who she likes based on probably his smells and his twitters. And I mean, if it was me, I would want to know more about that tail, but that's just me.
I know.
And like I said, there's not a lot that we know. I read one article that suggested that they had a very short estrus cycle, very short window of reception, similar to giant pandas, but we still need to know more. And then when male and female do breed, they have a wide variation on their gestation length. It can be anywhere from 112 to 158 days. So that suggests to reproductive physiologists or researchers that they have delayed implantation, which is like the giant panda. And that's where fertilization does occur. The egg develops a little bit, but then it goes on pause and basically doesn't implant itself right away into the uterus like it does in most mammal species. And so we know that the bear species do this. And Chris, but this is where their red pandas are different than the other family they're kind of related to, being the raccoons. Raccoons don't, at least as far as I know, don't practice delayed implantation or embryonic diapause. So, but it can probably depend on their nutrition status and what in the season and things like that. So, we're learning more from them as they are being bred under human care at some of these accredited zoos, and there's a species survival plan, but there's still a lot we don't know. What we have learned, though, thanks to these accredited zoos, is that the female will become noticeably lethargic about 6 weeks before parturition. And several days before she gives birth, she starts to nest. And I can relate to that. I remember cleaning everything and getting everything organized.
Nesting, yeah.
I don't think mine was not a few days. I think a few days before I gave birth, I was just like, feed me ice cream, put a fan on.
You were in the lab.
I was
in the lab.
That is a funny story. I was in the lab when my water broke. Oopsie. Well, no, it wasn't. Well, it was a computer lab. It wasn't like I wasn't pipetting. But still, yes, I was in the building.
Yes.
And anyways, different story.
Talk about insanely dedicated. Yes.
Yeah, but I was still eating ice cream and putting my feet up when I got home. I wasn't at that point. I had already nested. But female red pandas gather materials such as sticks and grass and leaves, and they like to build a nest. In the wild, the nest is going to be in a rock crevice or maybe in a tree that's been hollowed out, somewhere where they feel safe, right? And when they do give birth, the litter is anywhere from 2 to 4 cubs. And when red pandas do give birth, it's anywhere from 1 to 4 cubs. And red pandas are teeny tiny and super cute. They're about 100 to 130 grams at birth. Their skin's peak. They don't have any fur on their feet, which is darling. And their hair is actually woolly and gray when they're born. It doesn't turn into the reddish, beautiful color. It starts to change when they're a couple weeks old. But they are needy. Their eyes and ears are closed at birth, and they don't open until a couple weeks after they're born. And the female red panda is a very dedicated mama. She spends 60 to 90% of her time with her cubs, and she will slowly start leaving them for longer, going away from the nest to get food. But she always comes back every couple hours to nurse and groom them and to also keep the nest clean. And little red panda cubs, which are pretty darling, aren't going to really leave the nest or the nest box for a couple months, up to 90 days. And when they do come out, they come out at nighttime. So once again, it's hard for researchers to really learn a ton about what's going on in those early days. And the father, unfortunately, daddy red pandas don't have an active role in the child raising. But of course, the red panda mom is very committed. She stays with her cubs and her young as they grow, helps them learn how to be red pandas, and they'll stick around and have a close relationship, usually until they're like teenagers or juveniles, close to a year old, basically until her next theoretical litter comes along. And then everybody decides, probably similar to parents with a college kids, it's time to go. It's time to leave the nest.
Yeah, go.
Mm-hmm. And so young red pandas are going to reach maturity about at 12 months old or a year, and they won't reach sexual maturity until they're about 18 months or so. So they do have a shorter generation interval theoretically than a lot of the species that we talk about. However, I think with a lot of times only 1 or 2 cubs are born, and then they have to survive in the forest. And not all of them do, of course. And so they don't have that repopulation mechanism that rabbits have, or that even raccoons probably have, which is why we got to keep a close eye on them from a conservation point of view, because there's not many of them left, right?
No, endangered. And like you said, at maybe 10,000, but as low as maybe 2,500, which is nothing. That is nothing.
Well, no, and
a small population.
And
for the last of its kind.
Yes, and that's one of the things is I really think that there's a good amount of conservation efforts. It's just they're in several different countries, and we've talked about that a lot in the podcast. Is it's sometimes hard to get the countries on the same page with conservation efforts. But there does seem like in China, there's 35 protected areas. India has 20 protected areas that are known red panda habitats. You mentioned Nepal. They're doing a great job over there. There's 5 protected areas in Bhutan. Myanmar has 26 protected areas. So, there's a lot of good things going on, but when the numbers are that low, we start seeing population fragmentation, genetic bottlenecks. How do they find each other? They only come together for breeding. It's not like they live in these large family groups. So how do they get together, right? If they're
it's tough.
When the numbers are that low.
And I know one of their biggest pressures is not just habitat loss, but the illegal pet trade, poaching, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. They're not supposed to, but they are still sometimes poached or accidentally caught in other wildlife traps. Yeah. They might not want the red pandas, but they happen to get in their traps. And so
they end up getting them.
Yeah.
So, really need to support them. So who's out there fighting for red pandas that we need to highlight?
Well, Chris, I'm glad you asked. There is a group called the Red Panda Network. and they can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the major platforms. And their website is redpandanetwork.org. And this organization was founded by Brian Williams in 2007. And they're just known as a world leader in understanding red pandas and how to help protect them and their natural habitats.
Mm-hmm.
So they do research and monitoring. They help provide sustainable livelihoods for the communities in the area surrounding there. They do community-based conservation and education and outreach, which, of course, we mentioned on this podcast earlier, is critical. And then they work with the trickier stuff like the policy and the advocacy of how to really come together as a group of community landowners, governments, researchers, educators, and all of this, how to work together to basically adopt policies that will help protect pandas and their habitats. So their website's amazing. We'll put it on our show notes. They do a lot more than I'm able to describe here in my 1 or 2 minutes that I get to talk about the Red Panda Network. So trust me, following them on one of the social media feeds, if that's the least thing you do, you will thank me later, because it's really informative and they do a great job sharing with you and bringing red pandas into your living room and getting you excited. And if you are a red panda lover, they have amazing ways that you can help contribute not only to their work at the Red Panda Network, but just in general of how you can help red pandas in the wild. And I also say too, when accredited zoos open back up, which hopefully will be soon, go check out red pandas. If your local accredited zoo has red pandas, I guarantee you they will not disappoint. They are just beautiful, beautiful creatures and really fun to watch. And you can always think of Toby with his little English accent and his top hat as he is very agile, climbing down a log and up into trees.
I dork out. Like, I dork out every time we cover a species. It's like, that's the one I want to go see at the zoo next, or out in the wild. Been looking for robins all week. Have yet to see one. Hopefully I will. I want to order some binos so I can start bird watching. But, it's just, they're amazing.
Yeah.
They're
and
amazing.
I think that's the great thing is we all need some uplifting and fun and maybe charming creatures in our life right now. And I know the robin was really helpful for us to talk about them last week, and now the red panda. And so, like I said, fill your feed with some red pandas and some of these organizations like the Red Panda Network that are helping fight for them, and it'll lift your spirits as well.
Yeah. All right. So conservation tips this week. It's tourism, Angie. We know, not lately, but travel will open back up eventually. But tourism specifically is the world's largest industry, with ecotourism becoming one of the fastest growing segments within that, right? So when I think of Nepal, I think of, I want to go and support them for ecotourism. I want to come and let them know I'm coming because you support your animals. I'm making you in my top 5 list of the world spots I want to go, to help ecotourism. So, of course, travel is very carbon footprint heavy. It just is. That's the problem with it. But, I just want everybody to go plant trees, offset your carbon footprint, and then travel all you want, right? I know it's not as easy as that. But if we planted tons of more trees, we can offset some of this carbon. But here's some things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint or carbon emissions when you do travel. And I'm going to put this link on the show notes, but there's called the International Ecotourism Society, TIES, has an online directory for searches of certified hotels and lodges that are like accredited ecotourism hotspots or destinations. Okay. So everybody should be using TIES, the International Ecotourism Society, but they will actually show you some hotels or areas that are like very eco-friendly. And that's who we need to be supporting. Vote with our dollars. When you fly direct if you can. Okay. It might cost you a little bit more, but it's going to be less of carbon emissions, because takeoff and landing is like where we use the most fuel. when you get there, use local or public transport. Angie talked about in our, this was back in our, not Chihuahua, I think Chihuahua, Chile. The furry little cute little chinchilla things. Yes. Chinchilla.
Look at you with your dad brain. That's rare.
There we go, dad brain. Hey, after, we were talking red pandas. But Angie talked about, riding in the buses in South America, seeing the countryside, interacting with the locals. That is very eco-friendly. Do that.
And way more affordable.
Yes. And, stay in hotels that are eco-friendly. Like I said, the ties or some other things you can look for. There's Starwood Hotels and Resorts has been working with Conservation International. Marriott International, so Marriott Hotels, is working very hard to reduce the company's carbon footprint. So those are just some tips when you travel, but go support ecotourism. The animals need it.
Mm-hmm.
The environment needs it. That money you spend there helps, like especially with Nepal and places like Madagascar, South America, all these places we're going to go visit. But, awesome species, like, wow, just wow. It's so cute. So cute.
Yes, Chris, it was such a good week learning all about red pandas and loving on them. Oh my gosh, the videos are amazing. And thank you to everyone listening. And you guys are all education and conservation heroes just by learning and sharing this information. So that's what we have to do. We all have to come together and get everyone excited about red pandas and help protect them.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.